For all your t-shirt needs, check out TeePublic's Killer Selection. Follow the link in the description. Hey, what's up, people? Pizzao here, and concluding my series, Halloween with Hooper, a month-long celebration of Tobe Hooper's filmography. Today I want to talk to you guys about 1974's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And I don't want this to be a traditional review of the film, because God knows I've talked about The Texas Chainsaw Massacre on this channel a lot. And I don't really want to repeat myself and go into the plot and the performances and just, the usual stuff. I'm going to assume that you guys have already seen The Texas Chainsaw Massacre and probably love that movie. But what I want to stress about The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and it's something that I think even fans of the movie kind of overlook, is just how important a film it was for the horror genre. What a watershed moment it was. Texas Chainsaw Massacre created the blueprint for the contemporary American slasher movie. It has been followed, it has been copied, it has been ripped off, it has been homaged countless times. When you think of, the group of young people, the desolate location, the masked killer with their, trademark weapon of choice, the big chase, the final girl, the showdown, it all started with Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And we see all of those elements in so many slasher movies, even to this very day. And this was a movie that came out over 40 years ago. I cannot think of another movie aside from Night of the Living Dead that had that kind of impact on not just the horror genre, but on pop culture in general. And I really think, what George Romero did for contemporary zombie fiction with Night of the Living Dead, Tobe Hooper did for the contemporary American slasher film with Texas Chainsaw Massacre. However, I think just calling Texas Chainsaw Massacre a slasher movie doesn't do the film justice. There's a reason why there's a print of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre sitting in the Museum of Modern Art, because it's an incredibly powerful piece of filmmaking. It is a truly artful and intense and raw and ferocious piece of filmmaking. And to think that everyone who worked on that film, they were pretty much amateurs. They more or less did not have an idea of what they were doing aside from just wanting to make a scary movie. Also, keep in mind, they were shooting for a PG rating for this film in the beginning. There's just something about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and its reputation. And the film has a reputation that precedes it. And it's one of the tricks that the film plays on you. It's one of the it's almost this, a magic about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. First, it's just the title, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. What an evocative title. Even in people who've not seen the movie, if you say Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it just conjures forth all these images of blood and gore and grime and even when I was a kid renting videos out of the video store, I could rent any movie that I wanted. At one point, once the dam kind of broke and my mother realized that, I can let him rent, Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street and Halloween, whatever, and he's not gonna, it's not gonna scar him for life. I was allowed to rent whatever I wanted, with one exception, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Now, my mother had never seen Texas Chainsaw Massacre. All she knew of it was the reputation and the title. And in her mind's eye, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I can remember her telling me this vividly, as if it were yesterday. When I would ask her, well, why can't I rent Texas Chainsaw Massacre? She would say, because you don't need to watch people being cut up with a chainsaw. And in actuality, Texas Chainsaw Massacre is pretty much a bloodless film. There's very little bloodshed in that movie. It's all happening in your mind. It's all happening subconsciously. There's such an energy and just a ferocity to Texas Chainsaw Massacre that it's almost as if the movie drives the viewer crazy. It creates a little bit of madness. You're seeing things that aren't on the screen. People watched Texas Chainsaw Massacre and swore they saw a bloodbath. They swore that they saw bodies put up on hooks and hooks going into flesh and people being cut limb from limb with a chainsaw. That's not in the film. It's implied. You don't see any kind of penetration. You don't see any kind of, saw cutting into flesh. It's all suggested. And that's an immense power of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And when you see how artfully the film is made and how artfully it is composed, you really see Tobe Hooper's style shining through in Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The fact that the camera is constantly moving. I think they had they didn't have a whole lot of dolly track. So every time you see those tracking shots of Leatherface chasing Sally, they would run for a short distance, cut, push the camera back to the end of the dolly track, run, stop, push it back, run, stop. So I mean, they to pull that off was a very time-consuming process. The shot of Terry McMinn getting up off of the swing and walking toward the Sawyer house, and the camera goes under the swing, and it's that beautiful low angle, and the house just sort of rises up like it's going to consume her, which technically it kind of does. Just an immensely powerful just sequence. It's just that shot. The first scene in which you see Leatherface, when he bashes the guy with the hammer and picks him up and throws him inside like the slaughter room and slams that metal door and that sound, and oh my God, I can remember watching the movie for the first time and just like by the end of it, I had to pick my jaw up off the floor. It was the kind of film that just built and built and built and just got more and more intense until that dinner table sequence when the film just goes absolutely insane. And there's no resolution. There's no let up. The movie just ends on that brilliant, magic hour chainsaw dance by Leatherface. And then there's just that hard cut to black and it's over. I remember watching the film for the first time and I was probably, 14, 15, somewhere in the neighborhood when I first saw Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And I'd seen a lot of horror movies up to that point. I'd never seen a horror movie like that. I'd never seen a horror movie that was challenging me on a number of different levels. It was an attack on all the senses. It's like I could smell the rot there during that dinner sequence. I could smell the rotting meat there. I could feel the heat. It's such a hot movie. It looks like it's just an absolutely broiling film. Just the sweat. The fact that the old VHS that I rented for the film, that old media VHS, and God, I love that, the artwork on that box, just amazing artwork on that box. It was a VHS tape that had been watched a million times over, so it made an already grainy, washed out movie even grainier and even more washed out looking. you just had this, it was this overwhelming atmosphere and intensity that was just so palpable. It blew me away. It absolutely blew me away. By the end of it, I was literally picking my jaw up off the floor. And I remember going to, I believe I was working at a little convenience store near where I lived. Or at least I was hanging out there. I might have just been hanging out there a lot at this point before I actually got a part-time job there. But some buddies of mine worked there. And there was this little area where you could prepare food, and we just sort of hung out and played cards and stuff like that all the time. And I remember like telling my two friends that were there at the time, like, oh my God, I just saw the best horror movie that I've ever seen. It was so intense. It was so powerful. It was just it was so unique. It just, you know, being overwhelmed by the movie, being overwhelmed by this film. And it's a movie that I've seen countless times. And it still has that effect on me when I watch it today. I'm still so impressed looking at that movie and you know, how cheaply it was made and what a tight budget it was made and how grueling the conditions were in the summer of 1973 in which it was made, and the fact that these were mostly inexperienced film students making this movie. It's really, you know, lightning in a bottle that a film like this could have happened under those conditions. And on every level, I just love Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I think Leatherface is a great horror icon. I think he, at least in the first film, he's a completely sympathetic character, because where are all these hippies coming from who are trespassing on my property? You know, he only knows, you know what I mean? he's just, you know, he's more terrified than the hippies who were trespassing on his property, who he eventually turns into barbecue, but you know, they shouldn't have trespassed on his property. I love that fact that he is just as terrified, if not more so than, you know, than the hippies in the movie. I don't know, I love Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I love everything about it. I don't think you can overstate how important this movie was to the horror genre. And it's the movie that, whenever you think of Tobe Hooper, that's the movie. And as great as Texas Chainsaw Massacre is, and even if Tobe Hooper had only directed Texas Chainsaw Massacre and nothing else, he would still be worthy of his status as a master of horror. And I'm still speaking of him in the present tense, even though he's passed away. He would still have been worthy of his standing as a master of horror on the Mount Rushmore of horror, the big four: Romero, Craven, Carpenter, and Hooper. And how sad it is that three of those four are no longer with us. But just looking at Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I think it's a testament to how powerful that film is, that you can overlook really good movies in Tobe Hooper's filmography, like The Funhouse, like Eaten Alive, like Salem's Lot, like Life Force, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, and just go Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Because to a lot of people, everything else he did sucked. There's a lot of people out there who say Tobe Hooper directed Texas Chainsaw Massacre and everything else sucked. And that is an absolute shame. I think a lot of people who say that, they've either seen some of the later Tobe Hooper movies that weren't that great, or they're just regurgitating something that they read on a message board or something that they heard from a friend or whatnot, because that's not the case at all. There are some really good movies in Tobe Hooper's filmography outside of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but it's Texas Chainsaw Massacre that everyone points at when they think of Tobe Hooper. And again, that's because it is such an important and such a powerful and such a watershed movie that it deserves that status. But hopefully with this series, I shine some light on other Tobe Hooper films that you guys should definitely see. Go watch The Funhouse. Go watch Life Force. Go watch Chainsaw 2. Go watch The Mangler. There are some really good movies in Tobe Hooper's filmography that unfortunately get overlooked. If you haven't seen Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 1974, I really don't think you can call yourself a horror fan and not have seen this movie. It should be, you know what I mean, part of everyone's intro to horror movies. Horror Movies 101. Texas Chainsaw Massacre should be like lesson number 1, at least in my book. Yeah, I think I've said it all. Let me know what you guys think of Texas Chainsaw Massacre down in the comments section below. Let me know what you think of Tobe Hooper's career just overall down in the comments section below. Let me know if there were any films that I discussed during this series that you hadn't seen, but are now going to go see, or maybe have seen since I did the review. And let me know what you think of those movies down in the comments section below. Thanks so much for checking out this series. It's been a lot of fun going back and revisiting a lot of Tobe Hooper's movies. And yeah, so thanks for sticking with me throughout this series. I hope you guys all have a great, safe, and happy Halloween. If you like this video, please leave it a thumbs up. If you're not following me on social media, those links are in the description. They're also right around here. As always, thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Take care, and until next time, peace. Join the $1 a month club and help support my channel on Patreon. Thank you to current patrons Terry Delamore and Orc145626. Say hello to the internet, Jeremy.
Hello to the internet.